Hello and welcome back to another EDH deck design. I've been offline for a while, simply just working more and not really playing a whole bunch of Magic recently. But due to a recent card printed that I read and kind of didn't really pay attention to on a spoilers list, I decided to revisit an old EDH deck. No, I'm not running Braids as my general. The first time I ran the general in this deck, it was actually Kuon, the Ogre Ascendant there. Braid was one of my first mono black generals I ran when she was legal. When she was banned as a general, I took the deck that she had and replaced her with Kuon, putting her in the deck itself. It was a stacks build. Of course, I was entirely disappointed with that. It is not nearly as strong, as Kuon is just not nearly as strong as Braids for what that deck was designed to do. So I ended up changing the deck a whole bunch to focus on Kuon and different big mana and whatnots, essentially removing all stacks out of the deck. While I do miss Braids very, very much. Braids is just one of my favorite characters in the storyline, and decks that run her are always very fun. I know a lot of people don't like stacks designs and whatnot. Essentially, Bitter Blossom and Braids locks out the game if you get that early. A lot of people don't like that, but what I am now revisiting is Kuon, or Kuon, however you pronounce his name. Because there's another card that basically, another version of Merciless, or Fleshbag Marauder that got printed, a functional reprint with the exact same stats. That kind of card is fun with Kuon, as getting him to flip gets really easy. What this is, by the way, is he's a 3 mana, black for a 2/4 Ogre Monk. He's one of the champions or saviors Kami dudes that flips. And it's a legendary creature, so when he flips, his condition is met, he becomes a version of the Abyss. His condition being that 3 creatures have to have died on this turn, and then he checks at the end step, and that's what causes him to flip to an enchantment that says on everyone's upkeep, including myself, I have to sack a creature, or they sack a creature. The cool thing is he checks at end step, so he does not have to be in play for the check, or for the creatures to count, so I could essentially board wipe, then cast him, go to end step, and he will flip. But there's a lot of tricky things about using these guys as your general. There's a lot of them that become legendary creatures or enchantments, or legendary creatures that are not starting as legendary. Those are technically not legal, but of course some playgroups will allow that. A couple really awkward rule situations that need to be described that you probably won't understand running into this is, he is a legendary creature, but flipping him, he's still my general, although he's no longer a creature. It is a legendary enchantment. His devotion, although is not on this side, it is still 3 black as my devotion, is still the same mana cost. If you were to try to copy this enchantment, for example, the enchantment that says copy enchantment, the copy enchantment actually becomes a copy of the creature. Any kind of copy effects always become what it naturally is. The copy enchantment then, of course, could flip if the conditions are once again met. So let's set Kuon over here. This is no longer a stacks build. This is more or less a nutrition design. I am playing mind games with this deck. Essentially, there are about 15 cards in the deck that help him flip. I did not want to go the common route of making my own creatures be sacrificed, because that is not as beneficial as making my opponent sacrifice. So what I try to do is suggest to my opponents, or just some point early in game, state that I have about 15 cards dedicated to helping him flip. And then they will see me trying to get him flipped and dedicate resources to killing him. The entire deck is a stall mechanic. The win condition in this deck is big X burn spells where I can exsanguinate and whatnot people. So it's all about mind games. Creature package here is actually pretty stout for a deck running him as a general. It's all about getting me into the late game. So we have Burnished Hart for ramp. The Executioner is the functional reprint of Fleshbag Marauder. I like this new artwork. It's kind of hideous. Essentially, it's 3 mana. When it enters at 3/1, everyone has to sack a creature, including myself. So in multiplayer, this is usually all it takes to flip my general. This is the actual reason I chose to revisit Kuon, essentially a second version of him. It just makes it very easy to get him flipped. Coffin Queen is one of my favorite cards to run in a semi-reanimator deck. This is great for Kuon if I have him out and I can basically stack it so I can grab something, reanimate it before I have to sack it. Really good. I don't like him being a creature again because it is a version of greed. Disciple of Bolas is really good in this type of deck where I might have some big creatures coming up that I can gain life, sack it, gain some extra cards and whatnot. I am currently missing a Nirkana Revenant. It is one card of few that I plan on getting for this deck. This deck actually, by the way, started as a pretty budget list. Some cards got included that I just happened to have already, but this budget list was actually below like $50, and it just started going up from there. Nirkana Revenant would be an obvious shoe in here. Another thing I don't mind sacking or reanimating. Another thing that tends to really like looping itself over and over again. Sidisi is fantastic. This should be the general in a more competitive design, but for an attrition style deck where I want to go late game, she's really great, especially with some enchantments or recursion like the Phyrexian Reclamation. Archfiend of Depravity is nifty at keeping creatures down. This is again a really good way for getting Kuon to flip, because it keeps everyone at 2 creatures. The problem from what playtesting I've done with this deck so far is what naturally this deck does. It doesn't allow a lot of creatures to stay on the battlefield, so frequently he doesn't really do much, although against token armies and whatnot he's great. Bloodgift Demon is our flying Phyrexian Arena. Duplicant is probably actually going to be on the cutting slab soon. I don't really need a lot of extra removal. He's really only there good to get rid of like an Ulamog, something that I just can't destroy, but at the same time his mana cost he could be better. Generic beater, I don't mind getting tokens out of to sacrifice. Same thing. This is just really good to give me good devotion. Really good at getting rid of the token army. I tried not to put a lot of tutors in here. Ironically, I have no spell tutors. My only tutors are Sidisi and the demon coming up here, the Rune-Scarred one. And there's like an expedition map, I suppose. But I don't have any ways of guaranteeing him a whole bunch of ways. But I love seeing him. Overseer of the Damned is kind of a generic filler. It's a good way of destroying a creature and getting me tokens to sacrifice for Kuon. Rune-Scarred is basically our original tutor before Sidisi became a thing. Havoc Demon is one of my absolute favorite demons to run in mono black, or just about any way of shenanigans with my graveyard. I used to love running this and the Disciple of Bolas with, what is it called? The Cauldron Dance, I believe that's right. The one where I can instant speed on the opponent's combat, flicker something from hand in graveyard, and they switch. Essentially, this could be, if with Cauldron Dance, I used to hold it up as a board wipe because I could sack it with Disciple of Bolas. Essentially, when this dies, giving everything -5/-5 is essentially a good board wipe. A pretty good rattlesnake. And then Sheoldred is our big expensive creature of the deck. Just a good way, again, of stacking things like this. The sad thing is, again, since these things affect on the upkeep, I don't really have a way of like stacking triggers. Some things have to target. She targets a creature that has to be returned, so I can't sack and return the same thing because it's not a legal target. That was a stupid conundrum with braids, but it's still semi-plausible here. So again, I'm playing a goofy deck where I want to stall and have some shenanigans to make me not look as threatening. Good way of doing that is the one single good counterspell for black. There is, of course, Dash Hopes, which could be ran, but that one is not very good for EDH since the opponent probably won't mind paying life. This one is a creature counter. We have some spot removal, Dismember, Snuff Out, and Tendrils, which is, again, I'll most likely have a lot of swamps. A good way of gaining life. There's a lot of these coming up here. This one I cannot hit a player with. It is just creatures. This technically could be a tutor for 2. I don't really have anything good worth tutoring for other than maybe like the Drain Life or Consume Spirit or Exsanguinate, which is technically our win condition. This is more or less to stop some graveyard shenanigans or get that Exsanguinate. Wake the Dead is funny for mid-combat shenanigans. As you saw, a lot of my creatures have enter the battlefield stuff, and doing this on the opponent's combat step is great. Even if they're not attacking me, or they're just passing through combat, late game this is good to get some extra value. And I like the Fog effect. It is shenanigans, and this is just funny. I love Fog. This is a lot of stuff the opponent just won't expect. So let's go on. Those are all the instances. This is a giant stack of sorceries. There are probably about as many sorceries as creatures. So this is kind of how this deck is designed to win. Stall till I have enough mana to do something stupid like Consume Spirit them for the win. Consume Spirit is a reprinted type of Drain Life. Drain Life is the original one that you used to see in like Cadaver's Balloon combo, where I spend X mana, but the original one I cannot exceed the opponent's life or creature's toughness. Consume Spirit is the better one. It doesn't matter about the opponent's life or toughness. I can exceed that. And of course there's a worse version called Soul Burn, where I could use red mana And I guess that is why they made it cost 1 colorless more. It's not really better, it's just a completionist to put it in here. Corrupt is a sorcery that hits a creature or player for the number of swamps I control. And Exsanguinate is kind of the best win condition of the deck. It is literally just try to bleed everyone out, gain life, tempo them out until I can get this up to like 30 to 40. So that's kind of our win cons. The rest of these are ways of getting Kuon online. Innocent Blood's a perfect example of this. If I have 4 mana up and all my opponents have cast a creature before me, I can Innocent Blood and then cast Kuon and he'll flip at the end of turn. Somewhat similar with Barter and Blood, I will most likely have a harder time casting them both early. Infernal Offering is nifty for recurring a card. I'm not too sure how I like this so far for the mana cost. It's essentially going to reanimate. And I can choose opponents that have no creatures to sacrifice or nothing to reanimate. So in multiplayer it's good. 1v1 not so much. Reign of the Pit is another version of helping Kuon get online. Everyone sacks, including myself, to get a demon. Just another general good way of getting extra death triggers for him to flip. Same thing, this is actually one of the best spells for Kuon, making every opponent sack to get a zombie. I don't care about the zombies, it's another one-sided edict, or one-sided Innocent Blood effect, where all the opponents sack, and I usually get enough to keep him alive for a while. Little somewhat similar, just to get some extra cards. Exiles 2 creatures. I like Ashes to Ashes. This is a card that probably needs to see more play. Don't really care about the 5 damage to me, but exiling in mono black is good. I don't have a Damnation in here. The obvious inclusions would be Damnation and Toxic Deluge. These are my only 2 board wipes in the deck. Probably don't even need them, to be honest. I could probably get rid of one for more sack effects or maybe another exile effect. Like a Perilous Vault would maybe be a good inclusion in here. The 1 single reanimate is 1 mana to get such advantage is usually really good. And Rise of the Dark Realms is an alternate win condition. I do have some graveyard hate coming up, but this is honestly probably going to get me enough creatures back to win the game with. Now let's go on to the handful of other permanents I control. There are only 3 enchantments in here. I took the Grave Pact out, as I honestly didn't need it. Same thing with Erebos, Dictate of Erebos. Phyrexian Reclamation, although, is pure advantage. I will get back just about anything I need. Arena and Greed are there just for card draw. Essentially, I like Erebos over Greed, even though Erebos costs 1 colorless more to activate. His other benefit of preventing life gain is fantastic. And as I said, this is a budget deck, so not all my cards are legitimate. What I mean by that is the 3 Planeswalkers out of my 6 are not legitimate. I had a buddy make me a couple of these. Essentially, these are foiled black, like on black. So I wanted these in my mono black deck. Expensive Lily, this one didn't cost me a whole bunch, but this one helps me get my swamps. And essentially her emblem is the goal there. Like, try to be passive and keep her alive just to get the emblem without suggesting that to the opponents. If I get the emblem, I'll most likely win. Just a little bit of tutorage there too. I guess this is another tutor. I'm really tempted to actually take almost all the tutor effects out of this deck. The deck currently is rather strong in the meta I'm playing with. It could be stronger, but at the same time, I like the idea of running mono black without tutors as a somewhat challenge, just to see how far I can get with it. Obi Nichols is kind of the worst planeswalker in the deck. He really doesn't need to be here. He was going to be the general. Like, I was designing a mono black deck trying to make it work, but it just felt so cheesy and like a lot of good stuff. And he just feels like a good stuff general. He's here just because that +2 ability. I don't really care about the emblem, like it's a really good effect, but the +2 ability is there to keep me in the game. The demons will most likely die to Kuon. If I need them, I suppose, to keep another creature alive, that's fine. 2 more expensive walkers, though, is another foily blacked out Karn and a foily blacked out Ugin. This one I really like the looks of. It's kind of hard to catch this here, but the fellow that made these for me, he did a really fantastic job. But the blacked out planeswalkers for my mono black deck look awesome. And there are a handful of artifacts here. You got my typical ramp. I am running 38 lands. The deck is designed for late game, so I did not want a lot of artifact accelerant. So we got Wayfarer's Bauble because it can replace itself to a swamp. This is the only one it cannot replace itself. Soul Ring, of course. I don't have a Mana Crypt in here. I don't really plan on putting that in here. can sack itself and can sack itself. Essentially, the things that can get themselves to swamps, because I want as many lands as possible. I don't want as many permanents on the board until I'm about to take over. This is here to get me Cabal Coffers or Borg. These two are for Graveyard Hate. Again, these are a little awkward to see when I'm trying to hopefully get to a Rise of the Dark Realms, but that is not my primary win condition, and these are great at just dirtling around early games, keeping graveyards clear from recursion. Then these are my draw techs. Staff is an awkward one as well. I could easily put in a better draw mechanic for black. Maybe another like spell, like a Moonlight Bargain, something like that. I don't know. This is just kind of a filler until I get better. And I have not actually had this deck active for more than a week and a half, and I haven't play tested it enough to actually make cuts, but this is something that feels too expensive to be main decked. But these guys, although are fantastic, I really like the extra mana abilities, especially with my big X spells. These usually automatically just get dealt with because the opponents will see them coming. The lands, of course, as I said, there are 38. I am missing a few that I really want to get, notably a Vesuva, a Thespian Stage, and the Temple that untaps a land, because I am definitely running an Urborg and coffers in here. So Temple was here just to get some extra mana. I don't have another Ancient Tomb. Again, somewhat budget design. Bajuka Bogs there. Coffers and Urborg obviously make me the retarded amount of mana it takes to win. Getting copies of coffers is fantastic, and I will probably pursue that soon. Nykthos is very close to that, where I can use my Devotion, which is, again, the Devotion on him still counts, even if he's flipped. And a little bit of Rampy Ramp, and the rest of these are all the same portal lands. There's about 32 of them here. But yeah, this is my current mono black design for Kuon. I'm trying to persuade my play group to have to yell Khan from Star Trek, and if they do every upkeep when he affects them, I will have to take a drink. And the groups I drink with, of course, that doesn't matter. Again, this is not nearly as strong as a proper stacks deck with Braids. This is more or less a red herring. I am using him as a red herring to delay the game and expend the opponent's resources to deal with my board while I try to build up a ridiculous amount of mana to get an Exsanguinate or some kind of drain life effect off. And to be honest, politically speaking, keeping my board presence clear except for effects like this is actually good politically. People don't always want to see hyper-aggressive decks ramp out to crazy creatures early, so that he is honestly left alone quite a bit. That's really it. This is not a very aggressive deck. This is not something I would ever suggest going against 2 or less opponents. Maybe 3 or more opponents is where he's the best at, and that's where I play him at. Again, if this were to be more of a stacks build, you would see things like smokestacks or just nonsense like that. The actual namesake of what those cards are, maybe Sphere of Resistance or Winter Orb, fun cards. That's not in this deck, and it's important to emphasize to your opponents if you're doing a red herring approach, something manipulative like this, that you do not suggest you have those in here. It's better to point them in the wrong direction by emphasizing how much effort you're going to try to put into flipping your general when your opponent easily can play around your general by just not playing creatures. That's actually the point of the deck. I don't want the opponents to bother with aggressive starts, because the longer I'm in the game, the more mana I will have and the more damage I can do. Yeah, if you had any enjoyments like this. If you also like those Kami flip generals, I know I had Homoro, the red one, for a while. Some of these are pretty fun. They're pretty unique. They're not always the best. Some of them are just too easily dealt with. Sometimes the opponents want to immediately deal with them. Something like him, in a multiplayer setting, most opponents don't immediately want to deal with that. They're more interested in seeing how long or what presences can be promoted, because the effect hurts everybody, including myself. Oh yeah. And of course there's always the weird rule stipulations. Some people don't like unusual generals like this, but at the same time, being able to copying effects on him, explain the devotion, sometimes it makes for awkward gameplays. But it's all interesting. And any ideas, I'm always open to suggestions. Again, this deck has been alive for maybe a week and a half. There's a lot of things I really want to put in here. I don't want to put any Elderazzi's in here, so I'm probably going to put like an Elixir of Mortality, as I have seen a lot of my important spells going straight to the bin, and something like this I would really like to be able to cast twice, so an Elixir of Mortality would be great. I don't plan on putting Elderazzi in here. Narcana Revenant may make it in here. I know she's kind of expensive. But, yeah. Any ideas or feedback, always welcome.